Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video, the full version is available on Patreon. I'll be uploading all my content there going forward.
Chapter 1 Soul Society, Siritii, an ordinary yet extraordinary day. It is ordinary because the sky here is still a clear, almost unreal, azure blue, with wispy clouds drifting slowly, as if it has never changed since time immemorial. What makes this event extraordinary is that today is the annual entrance ceremony of the Shinigami Academy, a crucial moment for the infusion of fresh blood into the entire Soul Society. Souls from all directions in Rukanga who were fortunate enough to be detected as having high affinity for spirit particles and the potential to become Shinigami, gathered here with their own purposes and dreams, making the usually solemn and dignified entrance to the Spirit Arts Academy unusually bustling and vibrant. On the wide square paved with blue stone slabs, people were everywhere. The young souls' faces were filled with expressions of excitement, trepidation, or anticipation. Most of them wore coarse linen clothes commonly seen in Rukanga, though not luxurious, they were neat and tidy. Among them, there might be acquaintances from the same area chatting in hushed tones, but most of them were curiously observing the place where they would be studying and living for the next 6 years. The towering walls, the imposing gate, and the magnificent teaching buildings and vast training grounds that could be vaguely seen behind the gate. The air seemed to become scorching hot from the dense gathering of souls, and the fluctuations of spiritual particles rippled gently through the crowd like invisible waves. In this crowd dominated by people dressed in muted colors, one figure stood out from the crowd. He was dressed in a slightly worn but exceptionally neat black outfit. The black was not deathly still, but rather exuded a restrained depth. What's most striking is his slightly messy short purple hair, which gleams strangely in the eternal light of Soul Society. He stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, not interacting with anyone. He simply tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes so deep that they seemed out of place for a young soul. There was none of the excitement and unease that was common among those around him, only an almost cold calmness and a subtle, almost imperceptible scrutiny hidden deep within them. His name is Ling. A soul that should not exist here, or rather, should not exist in this form. His thoughts drifted back to the brief and hazy moments of his pre-death life, and the struggles of the past 5 years since his death. He is not a native of this world, his consciousness comes from another dimension. If nothing unexpected had happened, he should have become Ichigo Kurosaki's older brother, born into the Kurosaki family, and had a perhaps ordinary but complete family. However, fate played a cruel joke on him. Before he was even born, the power within his mother, Masaki Kurosaki, which originated from the Quincy bloodline and the Hollow, created an unknown conflict and corruption. This terrifying power not only nearly devoured his mother's life force but also caused his unborn child to die prematurely. His soul, along with his memories from another world, was forcibly stripped away prematurely. In a daze, he was accidentally discovered and his soul was buried by a grim reaper on a mission, leading him to this Rukanga, Soul Town. 5 years. He struggled to survive for 5 years in the chaotic, impoverished, and dog-eat-dog world of Rukanga. With the mind of an adult and a faint spiritual awareness brought about by a soul quality from another world, he carefully avoided danger, painstakingly acquired resources for survival, and frantically trained himself, guiding the growth of that weak but real spiritual power. All efforts are for one goal: to enter the true spiritual academy, gain power, and take control of one's own destiny. True Central Spiritual Arts Academy. Ling murmured the name, a slight, uncontrollable curve forming at the corners of his lips. That smile was a mixture of bitterness, relief, and an unwavering resolve. Death, I've come. The whispers faded into the air. Without further hesitation, he stepped forward and, with the flow of people, entered the door that symbolized his transformation and the starting point of his power. With steady steps and without the slightest hesitation, he completely left behind the struggles of the past 5 years and the Rukanga behind him in the light and shadow outside the door. The True Spiritual Arts Academy has a 6-year curriculum, which means he will have to spend at least 6 years here. Ling didn't care about this. 6 years? Compared to the magnificent yet perilous future he knew, 6 years seemed rather short. He calculated clearly that there were still about 10 years before the original storyline officially began. This decade will be a crucial window for him to accumulate strength and turn his fate around. Every minute and every second is precious. The enrollment process is complicated yet well organized. They registered on the roster, received a wooden badge representing their identity, and a brand new white student uniform with the True Spiritual Arts Academy emblem embroidered on the chest. Holding these items, Ling was led by a serious-looking student to her assigned dormitory and classroom. He was assigned to Class 1, the most outstanding class of this year's Shinigami Academy, which brought together the students with the highest spiritual pressure talent in this year's class. This was not unexpected for Ling. After all, his 5 years of hard training had not been in vain. Sitting in the spacious and bright classroom, Ling looked around. The brand new wooden desks were neatly arranged, and the air was filled with the scent of wood and ink. Most of the young trainees sat upright, their faces showing both nervousness from their first arrival and anticipation for the future. Ling's gaze seemingly casually swept over these future classmates, but in his heart, he was quietly activating a secret that belonged only to him. Yes, as a time traveler, Ling is not without support. He possesses a system. However, this system was far more rudimentary than one could imagine. For 5 years, no matter how he tried and explored, this system, dormant deep within his consciousness, seemed to have only one function: detecting spiritual pressure. It's like an extremely simplified attribute panel, only displaying the spiritual pressure value of the target object, with no other interaction or function. At least, it's better than nothing. Ling could only console herself with this thought. With a slight thought, a semi-transparent panel, visible only to him, appeared in his field of vision. Spiritual pressure, 11. This is his own data. Looking at this number, Ling couldn't help but sigh softly in her heart. 11 points of spiritual pressure. Is this all the result of his 5 years of struggle and arduous training? He lacks a clear frame of reference to understand what this value actually means. In Rukanga, he almost never encountered anyone worth investigating with his system. Those ordinary individuals even had only 1 to 2 points of spiritual pressure. He suppressed his slight disappointment, turned his gaze to the classmates around him, locked his thoughts, and the values on the system panel changed accordingly. Spiritual pressure, 9. Spiritual pressure, 10. Spiritual pressure, 9. Spiritual pressure, 10. After examining 7 or 8 people, the values generally hovered between 9 and 10. Ling understood. It seems that the spiritual pressure threshold to enter Class 1 is around 9 points. My 11 points would be considered above average among this group, but certainly not top tier. This discovery both relieved him, at least he wasn't at the bottom, and made him feel a sense of urgency. Geniuses are not few and far between, and he couldn't afford to be complacent in the slightest. Just as Ling was assessing the abilities of his future classmates, the light at the classroom door dimmed slightly, and a figure walked in. The newcomer was dressed in a standard Shinigami uniform, with a light grey shawl over it, symbolizing his status as a teacher. He looked to be around 30 years old, with a serious face, strong features, a taut jaw, and sharp, eagle-like eyes that swept across the classroom with an undeniable air of authority. A faint scar below his left eye added to his sharp and menacing appearance. His arrival seemed to bring a tangible pressure, instantly silencing the previously slightly noisy classroom. All the trainees unconsciously straightened their backs. I am Yamada Kiyomitsu, a full-time swordsmanship instructor at the Shinigami Academy, and also your class's homeroom teacher. The man's voice was deep and powerful, without any unnecessary words. For the next 6 years, I will be responsible for guiding your swordsmanship training and supervising your studies and discipline. Yamada Kiyomitsu? Ling quickly searched his memory and confirmed that there was no such character in the original work. That makes sense. There are many Shinigami in Siritai, and countless teachers at the Shinigami Academy, it's impossible to keep records of every single one. However, judging from his temperament and spiritual pressure, he is by no means an ordinary person. He is likely a member of the Godai 13 with rich combat experience or a former member. Ling calmly activated the system's detection function. Mind lock, system panel flashes, values appear. Spiritual pressure, 58. 58 points of spiritual pressure. This number is lower than what Ling had previously expected for the ordinary members of the Godai 13, but considering that the other party is a full-time teacher, perhaps focusing more on teaching than pure combat, this number is reasonable. Moreover, this once again confirmed Ling's guess, the system's values are not a simple linear relationship. The sense of pressure brought by 58 points of spiritual pressure is far more than 5 or 6 times that of 11 points of spiritual pressure, it is a qualitative difference. This gave him a more intuitive understanding of the power levels of the Shinigami, an experienced teacher whose spiritual pressure was something he needed to look up to at this stage. The Shinigami Academy aims to train Shinigami to protect the order of the Seireitei and the Soul Society. Yamada Kiyomitsu began to speak, the content of which was similar to what Ling had expected, mainly the Academy's rules, curriculum, and the duties of Shinigami. Here you must learn 4 skills: slash, fist, walk, and ghost. Slash refers to swordsmanship, the foundation of death, fist refers to close quarters combat, walk refers to instantaneous movement, high-speed footwork, and ghost refers to the art of magic, offensive and defensive spells. Lacking any one of these could cost you your life in future missions. Yamada's speech was concise and to the point, without any inspiring platitudes, only stark reality and stern demands. This actually made Ling Wei nod slightly. Compared to gentle encouragement, this straightforward approach was more in line with the nature of this dog-eat-dog world. For Ling, the lecture content itself was nothing new. He appeared to be listening attentively, but his mind was already planning his future spiritual practice. Swordsmanship is fundamental, it must be practiced diligently and without ceasing. Instant step is a matter of life and death, so it has the highest priority. White hat tanning can be used as a supplement. Ghost path. Ling considered its complex incantation and precise control requirements. Although it was incredibly powerful, it might not be the optimal choice for him in the early stages. He had a vague feeling that the unique nature of his soul might be more suited to a more direct path, one that relied more on the Zanpakuto itself. The most important thing is, to obtain a Sachi as soon as possible and find an opportunity to communicate. The dangerous plan about the Zanpakuto resurfaced in his mind, making his blood rush slightly. The risks are enormous, but the rewards could be just as unimaginable. Kiyomitsu Yamada's speech ended quickly. That concludes the morning session. This afternoon, the first practical swordplay instruction will be held at the 3rd training ground. No lateness is permitted. He swept his stern gaze across the entire area, lingering for a moment on a few students who appeared somewhat undisciplined, before turning and leaving decisively. The tense atmosphere in the classroom eased considerably as soon as the homeroom teacher left. The trainees began to stretch their bodies and chat in hushed tones, preparing to head to the cafeteria. Ling slowly tidied up her blank notes, preparing to get up. At that moment, he clearly felt several malicious gazes coming from his side and behind. He glanced at them out of the corner of his eye and saw the 3 burly, arrogant students he had noticed earlier. They exchanged glances, seemingly discussing something, their eyes scanning Ling's purple hair and black clothes with obvious provocation. They've come, just as I expected. Ling thought with a cold smile. One of the survival rules of Rukanga is that retreating and yielding will only invite more unscrupulous oppression. Although he disdained this childish way of establishing authority, he understood that sometimes, demonstrating a certain level of strength and attitude could prevent more trouble in the future. If the other party insists on coming at him, he wouldn't mind using them to test the results of his 5 years of work, and incidentally, to give the rest of the class a heads up. He stood up as if oblivious to everything, draped his white uniform over his arm, and walked straight toward the classroom door. His pace was neither hurried nor slow. Sure enough, just as he was about to walk out the door, the three male students exchanged glances, quickly got up, and followed him in a semi-encircling formation. One of them deliberately bumped into Ling with his shoulder. "Hey, you purple-haired brat, wait a minute." Ling paused slightly, easily dodging the seemingly unintentional but actually forceful impact by turning to the side. He stopped and slowly turned around. His dark pupils calmly looked at the three students blocking the doorway. His face was expressionless, showing neither fear nor anger, only a deep, still silence. "What's up?" he asked, his voice so flat it betrayed no emotion. The burly student at the head of the group was taken aback by Ling's composure. He paused for a moment, then his face darkened with displeasure. He deliberately raised his voice, saying, "It's nothing serious, just a reminder that each class has its own rules. Someone like you, a lowly commoner, should know how to keep a low profile." The surrounding students were all drawn to the sudden conflict, stopping to watch, and the atmosphere instantly became somewhat awkward. Ling's gaze swept over the three of them indifferently, and the system's detection subconsciously activated. Spiritual pressure, 9. Spiritual pressure, 10. Spiritual pressure, 9. The highest one only had 10 points of spiritual pressure, just barely reaching the threshold of Class 1. Ling's lips twitched upwards very slightly, almost not a smile, but rather carrying a faint hint of pity. He didn't answer their childish provocation. He simply glanced at them again with his unfathomable gaze, and then, under everyone's watchful eyes, without a word, turned around and walked out of the classroom with his usual steady steps, completely ignoring the commotion behind him, the stairs, and the three provocateurs whose faces had turned ugly. Sunlight streamed through the corridor windows, casting his shadow long and thin. His silhouette, amidst the complex gazes of the crowd, appeared exceptionally lonely, yet exuded an unyielding certainty. The turbulence of the first day seemed to have only just begun. The afternoon swordsmanship class was destined to be anything but peaceful. A chill crept into Ling's heart, a hint of anticipation for real combat. Chapter 2. The brief standoff at the classroom door did not develop as the three provocateurs had anticipated. Ling's complete disregard, as if their silence were merely air, made them feel more embarrassed and angry than any vehement rebuttal. Especially the burly boy who was leading the group, named Aoki, watched Ling Zi's purple-haired figure disappear around the corner of the corridor. The muscles in his cheeks twitched slightly as he gritted his teeth, and his eyes almost spit fire. "Damn it! That purple-haired BD!" Aoki cursed under his breath, his fists clenched so tightly they cracked. His two henchmen, one short and stout named Tsuchiya and the other tall and thin named Nishimura, also had faces full of resentment. "Brother Aoki, he just left like that? He really doesn't respect us at all," Tsuchiya said in a muffled voice, his tone filled with annoyance at being slighted. Nishimura's eyes were sinister as he lowered his voice, "Judging by his appearance, he's just a lowly commoner from Rukanga, lucky to have a slightly higher spiritual pressure, yet he dares to be so arrogant." Aoki took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the urge to immediately chase after them and attack. "This is the teaching area. If they cause trouble right at the start of the semester, even with their status as a noble collateral branch, they will inevitably be punished." He stared in the direction Ling had left, a cold and cruel smile slowly spreading across his lips. "It's all right. We have swordsmanship class this afternoon. Mr. Yamada is notoriously strict and strongly advocates for sparring." Aoki's voice carried a hint of anticipation. In the training grounds, it's perfectly normal for him to accidentally injure a couple of overconfident newbies. He could almost see Ling being beaten to a pulp in front of everyone, kneeling on the ground begging for mercy. Nobles, even those from distant branches with diluted bloodlines, are not to be underestimated by the lowly commoners of Rukanga. He was determined to get his revenge, with interest, for this humiliation in swordsmanship class. Let's go eat first and get some rest. Aoki waved his hand, took his 2 followers, and left the classroom, already planning how to legitimately teach Ling a lesson that afternoon. Meanwhile, Ling had already put those 3 boring provocateurs out of her mind. Instead of wasting his energy on this pointless conflict, he had more important things to think about. He strolled through the spacious campus of the Shinigami Academy. The courtyard was elegantly planned, with a winding white stone path flanked by neatly trimmed pines and cypresses and unidentified spiritual flowers and herbs. Occasionally, a small pond could be seen dotting the landscape, its clear water reflecting the eternal blue sky of the Soul Society. Some of the early arriving trainees gathered in 2s and 3s, chatting excitedly and full of hope for the future. However, this peaceful and serene atmosphere could not completely dispel the sense of urgency in Ling's heart. Shallow strike. He kept repeating this word to himself. According to the information he knew, the prototype of the thousands of nameless Zanpakuto, Asachi, was forged by the sword god Nimeyaritsu of the Zero Division, and was only awarded to students upon graduation and formal joining the Godai 13. This means he will have to wait a full 6 years to access the core of the Grim Reaper's power. 6 years. For him, who foresaw the impending storm, this period of time felt far too long. Aizen's conspiracy, the Arankar invasion, the Wandenrika's war, all of these will erupt one after another in about 10 years. He must gain power more quickly, he cannot wait in a step-by-step manner. There must be other ways. Ling frowned in thought. The original work seems to mention that certain individuals with special backgrounds or exceptional talents might be able to obtain the skill of Asuna earlier. Or perhaps, in the history of Soul Society, there have been unrecorded exceptions. He needs information, he needs to understand more of the hidden rules. The library of the True Spiritual Arts Academy is perhaps the place he should focus on next. But for now, increasing one's spiritual pressure remains the fundamental task. Without sufficient spiritual pressure, even if one obtains Asachi in advance, one cannot unleash its power, let alone communicate with the Zanpakuto and learn its Shikai. He looked around and found a relatively quiet stone bench near a huge cherry blossom tree to sit down. The dense canopy of trees casts a large area of shade, isolating most of the view and noise. He decided to use his lunch break to try his first formal meditation practice. According to the basic outline of spiritual arts issued upon enrollment, there are several main ways for Shinigami to increase their spiritual pressure. First, through meditation, they refine the origin of their soul, nurture and assimilate the spiritual particles within their bodies. Second, through high-intensity training such as slaying fist and walking demon, they stimulate the growth of spiritual pressure through consumption and recovery. And third, they deeply communicate with their own Zanpakuto, promoting each other's growth. For students who have not yet mastered basic striking, meditation and fundamental training are the primary methods. Ling sat cross-legged, formed a simple calming mudra with his hands, placed them on his knees, and tried to clear his mind of distractions. Following the method described in the outline, he immersed his consciousness into his body to perceive the faint yet active energy particles, spiritual particles that permeated every corner of his soul. At first, there was only chaotic darkness and a sense of emptiness surrounding the soul itself. But Ling was not discouraged. He focused his mind and patiently guided the child. Gradually, countless tiny specks of light, floating like dust, began to appear in his conscious field of vision. These points of light, a pale white, trembled and swirled as if they possessed a life of their own. These are the spirit particles that form the basis of the Grim Reaper's power. The next step, and the most crucial and difficult one in meditation, is to use one's own soul essence, which can be understood as the core consciousness or will, to connect with these spiritual particles and leave one's own unique mark on them. This process is called spiritual particle assimilation or marking. Only marked spiritual particles can be manipulated by the Grim Reaper at will and transformed into true spiritual pressure. Ling carefully separated an extremely subtle wisp of his soul consciousness, like a tentacle, and slowly reached out towards the nearest spiritual particle. However, just as that wisp of thought was about to touch the surface of the spirit particle, a faint but clear repulsive force came, as if there was an invisible barrier on the surface of the spirit particle, gently repelling his thought. It's not that simple after all, Ling realized. The outline mentions that it is normal for beginners to fail dozens or even hundreds of times. Spiritual particles are inherently inert and resist being bound. This requires immense patience and precise control. He remained calm, adjusted his breathing and mental focus, and tried again. Once, twice, 3 times, each time they made contact, they were repelled by that invisible barrier. The strain on his willpower brought a slight feeling of mental fatigue, but he persevered. Time slipped away quietly as I focused on my practice. After an unknown amount of time, when Ling made his 13th attempt, his more refined and gentler intention finally broke through the invisible barrier and gently and completely enveloped the spiritual particle. In an instant, a wonderful connection was established. It was as if that originally cold and distant spiritual particle had suddenly become friendly, as if it had become an extension of his body. Ling could clearly sense the faint energy contained within it and could guide it at will. He immediately followed the outline and imprinted the unique fluctuations of his own soul's origin onto the core of this spiritual particle, as if stamping it. Imprint complete. In that instant, Ling clearly felt that the fluctuations of his overall spiritual energy seemed to solidify into an almost imperceptible trace. A thought struck him, and he immediately brought up the system panel. Spiritual pressure, 12. It really did improve. It changed from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Although it's only a small amount, it's of great significance. This proves that meditation is an effective method. He has found the right way to enhance his power. The joy of success was like a clear spring, slightly easing the sense of urgency in his heart. Just as he was preparing to press on and attempt to assimilate the second spiritual particle, he caught a glimpse of the changing light and shadow on the ground out of the corner of his eye. Looking up, I realized the sun was already setting, and there was probably very little time left before afternoon classes started. Oh no! Swordsmanship class! He immediately snapped out of his meditative state and stood up abruptly. After sitting cross-legged in one position for a long time, he felt a tingling and numb sensation in his legs, but he didn't care. He quickly determined his direction and immediately sprinted towards the third training ground. True Spiritual Arts Academy, third training ground. This is an extremely open area, with the surface paved with hard blue stone, polished slightly rough to prevent slipping. Several weapon racks were placed at the edge of the field, displaying unsharpened wooden practice swords. Dozens of students from Class 1 had changed into white practice uniforms for easy movement and stood in neat rows. The air was filled with the scent of grass and earth, and an invisible sense of tension. Kiyomitsu Yamada had already arrived. He was still wearing his Shinigami uniform, covered by a teacher's cloak, with his arms crossed, standing at the front of the line like a stone statue, his sharp eyes scanning every student present. His serious aura silenced the entire training ground, even breathing became deliberately softer. Report the numbers. Yamada Kiyomitsu commanded in a deep voice. A boy standing at the front of the line immediately turned around and began counting heads in a loud voice. The boy's name is Ise Renjiro. He comes from the lower-ranking noble family of Ise. Because of his outstanding spiritual pressure and calm demeanor, he was temporarily appointed as the class representative by Yamada Kiyomitsu. 1, 2, 3, 58, 59. Ise Renjiro finished counting carefully, then turned to Yamada Kiyomitsu and respectfully reporting to teacher Yamada, Class 1 should have 60 students, 59 are present, 1 is absent. Kiyomitsu Yamada frowned slightly, who's missing? Ise Renjiro had clearly done his homework, answering without hesitation, it's Ling, a student from the 76th ward of Rukanga. Ling. Yamada Kiyomitsu recognized the name. During the class assignments in the morning, he had a general sense of the spiritual pressure of all the students. This purple-haired boy named Ling had a relatively outstanding spiritual pressure among the new students in the class, which left a slight impression on him. I didn't expect to be late for the first practical class of the semester. In the queue, Aoki, Tsuchiya, and Nishimura exchanged a glance, their faces showing schadenfreude. Aoki muttered to his companion in a very low voice, "What a coward. Looks like he was too scared to come after hearing we were going to take care of him this afternoon." "Humph, even if he comes, Mr. Yamada will not let him off easily." Tsuchiya chimed in. Nishimura smiled sinisterly, "It would be best to just cancel his admission, that way we won't have to lift a finger." Most of the trainees remained silent, some out of curiosity, some indifferent, and some with a touch of sympathy for the latecomers. Being late for Mr. Yamada's class, who is known for his strictness, on the first day of school is not a good sign. Kiyomitsu Yamada looked up at the sky, then glanced at the entrance to the training ground. It was still deserted. His face darkened. Punctuality is of paramount importance in the world of death, often determining the success or failure of a mission and even life or death. He was extremely disgusted by this lax attitude. The discipline of the Shinigami Academy is inviolable. Yamada Kiyomitsu's voice was icy, carrying an unquestionable authority. "ISE, record this as the punishment for being slowly sliced to death. Now, we..." He was about to announce that he would no longer wait and would begin the class. However, before he could finish speaking, a series of hurried footsteps approached from afar, breaking the silence of the training ground. All eyes turned to the entrance. A black figure was seen rushing towards them at an extremely fast speed. His short purple hair flew as he ran, and there seemed to be a trace of sweat on his forehead. It was Ling. At the last moment, he finally arrived at the third training ground. Chapter 3. Kiyomitsu Yamada stood like a rock in the center of the training field, his sharp, hawk-like eyes fixed on Ling, who was rushing towards him. Only when Ling stopped at the front of the line, slightly out of breath, did Yamada Kiyomitsu speak in his signature deep, cold voice, each word as clear and heavy as a pebble hitting a bluestone slab. "Ling, explain why you are late." The entire training ground was completely silent. All the trainees held their breath, their eyes shifting back and forth between the stern instructor and the latecomer, Ling. Aoki, Tsuchiya, and Nishimura all wore undisguised mocking smiles, waiting to see a good show. Ling calmed herself, raised her head, and met Yamada Kiyomitsu's scrutinizing gaze. She neither flinched nor panicked, but simply replied calmly, reporting to Master, "I was practicing meditation and momentarily lost track of time." Meditation? Yamada Kiyomitsu raised an eyebrow. This answer was clearly somewhat unexpected. He had expected to hear lame excuses like "I got lost" or "I overslept." Almost subconsciously, he focused his spiritual senses and carefully perceived the spiritual pressure fluctuations emanating from Ling's body. Upon this investigation, a barely perceptible hint of surprise flashed in Kiyomitsu Yamada's eyes. He had roughly sensed this student when he was in the classroom that morning. His spiritual pressure was excellent among the freshmen, but not exceptional. However, at this moment, although Ling's spiritual pressure was still weak, it was noticeably more solid than in the morning, and it carried the afterglow of a newly activated and circulating energy. This was indeed a characteristic of successfully completing an effective meditation. Moreover, the intensity of this spiritual pressure seems to have actually increased a little. "You succeeded? You completed spiritual assimilation on your first attempt at meditation." Yamada Kiyomitsu's tone remained calm, but those familiar with him might detect a very subtle fluctuation within it. It should be noted that the basic outline of spiritual arts of the True Central Spiritual Arts Academy was only distributed this morning. The vast majority of freshmen cannot even activate their own spiritual particles, let alone the most difficult marking. Anyone who can complete this step on the first day during the first lunch break is a genius that comes along only once in a decade. Ling nodded, her tone still calm. Yes, teacher. I succeeded once by sheer luck. Just luck. Yamada Kiyomitsu thought dismissively. The path of meditation prioritizes focus and resilience of the soul, there is no room for luck. He gave Ling a deep look. This purple-haired boy from the 76th ward of Rukanga seemed much more interesting than he had expected. Meanwhile, the conversation between the two had already caused a huge uproar in the queue. Meditation? He succeeded. Are you kidding me? I haven't even properly sensed the spiritual particles yet. I've only read the preface of the outline. A monster? A guy from Rukanga? Whispers spread like wildfire as the students looked at Ling with disbelief, shock, and even a hint of jealousy. The mocking smiles of Aoki and the other two froze on their faces, turning into astonishment and even greater displeasure. They came from a collateral branch of nobility, had been exposed to spiritual knowledge since childhood, and were well aware of the difficulty of initial meditation. Ling's success was like a slap in the face to their pitiful sense of superiority. As the class representative, Ise Renjiro's eyes also flashed with intense surprise, but he quickly composed himself, maintaining a serious posture, though his gaze towards Ling held a newfound solemnity. Ignoring the students' commotion, Kiyomitsu Yamada walked to the weapon rack at the edge of the field and casually picked up a standard wooden sword. Wooden swords are made of hard material and are heavy in the hand, they are tools specifically designed for combat training. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the wooden sword with a whistling sound as it precisely struck Ling. Ling subconsciously reached out and caught it. The wooden knife felt slightly heavy in his hand, and the cold touch invigorated him. He gripped the wooden sword and looked at Yamada Kiyomitsu with some confusion. Yamada Kiyomitsu picked up another wooden sword from the weapon rack, tapping the blade lightly with his knuckles to produce a dull thud, and slowly walked back to the center of the arena. His tone left no room for argument. Late is late. Excuses cannot completely excuse wrongdoing. In the Shinigami Academy, especially in the world of Shinigami, discipline and strength are equally important. He stopped, turned around, his wooden sword hanging casually at his side, his gaze fixed intently on Ling. Ling, I'll give you a chance. Come forward and withstand 3 moves from me. If you can do it, I'll forgive your lateness. If you can't, or dare not. He paused, not continuing, but the pressure had already descended. These words caused an uproar throughout the room. How about sparring with Mr. Yamada? Although it was only 3 moves, those were official members of the Godai 13. Even if they were only using wooden swords, their strength was far beyond what these freshmen, who hadn't even mastered basic combat, could imagine. This is simply an impossible task. Ms. Yamada is trying to give him a hard time. 3 moves? You couldn't even withstand 1. That kid from Rukanga is in for a world of trouble. Aoki almost burst out laughing, whispering, Great! We don't even need to lift a finger, Mr. Yamada will personally teach him a lesson. Let's see how he embarrasses himself. Ling gripped his wooden sword, looking at Yamada Kiyomitsu, whose imposing aura was as solid as a mountain in the center of the arena, and felt a sense of helplessness. He certainly didn't want to stand out at this time, much less get into a fight with the teacher. But Kiyomitsu Yamada's attitude was clear, this was not a discussion, but an order. Reject? That implies cowardice, it implies giving up voluntarily, and the consequences could be even more serious. He took a deep breath, clearing his mind of all distractions. Since there's no way to avoid it, the only option is to face it. Perfect timing. He also wanted to experience firsthand what kind of power real Grim Reaper members possessed. This is crucial for him to assess himself and plan for the future. Yes, teacher, Ling replied, her voice soft but unusually firm. Holding the wooden sword, he walked step by step to the center of the training ground and stood opposite Yamada Kiyomitsu. The two stood facing each other, and the atmosphere instantly became tense. The sunlight stretched their shadows long, casting them onto the hard, blue stone ground. Ling gripped the hilt of the wooden sword tightly with both hands, assuming a basic slashing stance. His muscles tensed, his senses were heightened to the limit, and all his attention was focused on Yamada Kiyomitsu. He knew perfectly well that there was a chasm of spiritual pressure between him and his opponent, and that he had absolutely no chance of winning by fighting head-on. His only hope lay in blocking and absorbing the force, using his skills and reflexes to survive 3 moves. Yamada Kiyomitsu, observing Ling's serious demeanor as if facing a formidable enemy, casually gripped his wooden sword with one hand, the tip pointing diagonally to the ground. His posture was so relaxed that it seemed he wasn't in battle, but rather taking a stroll. "Ready?" he asked calmly. Ling didn't answer, but nodded vigorously, her eyes sharp as knives. The instant Ling nodded, Yamada Kiyomitsu moved. Without warning, and without even a clear glimpse of his raised hand, the seemingly casual wooden sword had already transformed into a blurry black shadow, carrying an incomparably sharp aura, and simply and directly slashed down towards Ling's head. This strike had no fancy techniques, only pure speed, power, and honed precision. The air was torn apart, emitting a short, sharp whoosh. "Wow, so fast!" Ling's alarm bells rang loudly. He was completely focused, his eyes fixed on the trajectory of the wooden sword that was coming at him. Just as the wooden knife was about to strike, he exhaled sharply and gripped the knife with both hands, forcefully blocking it upwards. Bang! A dull, teeth-grinding thud resounded. The instant the 2 swords clashed, Ling felt an overwhelming force surge through the wooden blades, causing his arms to go numb and his tiger's mouth to feel like it was about to split open. The azure stone ground beneath his feet could not withstand the force at all. Centered on his feet, a spider web of fine cracks instantly spread out, and his ankles even sank slightly into the ground. The immense pressure caused Ling's body to involuntarily bend, but he gritted his teeth, veins bulging on his neck, and with sheer willpower and instinctive reflexes, he managed to block the seemingly casual but terrifying blow. "They're blocking it!" someone in the queue exclaimed in surprise. Everyone stared wide-eyed, looking at the scene in disbelief. That boy from Rukanga actually managed to block Yamada-sensei's first strike. Although it seemed extremely difficult, he did manage to block it. A flicker of surprise crossed Yamada Kiyomitsu's eyes once again. Although he used less than 1/10 of his strength in that strike, it was still something that no ordinary freshman could withstand. Ling's reaction speed, judgment, and explosive power far exceeded his expectations. As expected, this is interesting. Yamada Kiyomitsu thought to himself, and with a slight flick of his wrist, he released the force. Ling took a half step back, breathing heavily, his hand holding the wooden sword trembling slightly. With just 1 strike, he experienced firsthand what an absolute difference in strength truly meant. He was horrified. Is this the true power of the Grim Reaper? It's ridiculously strong. Yamada Kiyomitsu didn't give Ling much time to catch his breath. With a flick of his wrist, the wooden sword changed from a slash to a sweep, drawing a sharp arc as it slashed horizontally towards Ling's waist and abdomen. This strike was faster and at a more tricky angle. Second move. Ling's pupils contracted. The tingling and numb sensation from taking the first stab hadn't completely subsided when the second stab arrived. He didn't have time to think, relying entirely on the fighting instincts honed while struggling to survive in Rukanga, he thrust his wooden sword downwards in an attempt to block. Clang! Another crisp sound. This time, although Ling managed to block the sweeping attack with the blade, he couldn't completely neutralize the immense power and impact it contained. He was struck as if by an invisible giant hammer, his feet leaving the ground, flying uncontrollably backward, tracing an arc in the air, and crashing heavily onto the bluestone ground 3 or 4 meters away with a dull thud. The wooden sword flew out of my hand and landed not far away. Ling felt as if her internal organs had shifted, her blood and qi were churning, a metallic sweetness rose in her throat, and her vision blurred. "Ling!" one of the students couldn't help but exclaim. "As expected, it still doesn't work." Someone sighed. The three of them, including Aoki, were overjoyed and almost cheered. Yamada Kiyomitsu stood up, looked at Ling who was lying motionless on the ground, and calmly asked, "Can you still stand up? If not, even if you..." Before he could finish speaking, Ling, who was lying on the ground, twitched his fingers slightly. Then, with trembling arms, he struggled to sit up. He shook his slightly dizzy head, his vision blurry as he searched for the fallen wooden knife. He crawled over little by little, reached out and grabbed the knife handle, then used the wooden knife to support himself on the ground, gritted his teeth, and slowly, bit by bit, got back to his feet. His body swayed slightly, his face was somewhat pale, but in his dark eyes burned an indomitable flame. "Continue, teacher." Ling's voice was a little hoarse, but it carried an undeniable firmness. Upon seeing this, the previously noisy training ground fell completely silent. Everyone looked at that stubbornly standing figure with complicated emotions. Taking the next blow might be a fluke, but being able to stand up after being knocked away and demand to continue requires not only strength but also astonishing willpower. Even Ise Renjiro's eyes flashed with admiration. The smiles of Aoki and the other two froze again, and their expressions turned ugly. As Yamada Kiyomitsu looked at Ling, who had stood up again, the usually placid expression on his face underwent a noticeable change, for the first time a faint but genuine smile of appreciation. "Very good." Yamada Kiyomitsu nodded. "Then, the third move will begin." As soon as he finished speaking, Yamada Kiyomitsu's aura suddenly changed. If his attack just now was merely casual, then at this moment, a terrifying spiritual pressure truly belonging to the level of a captain of the Godi 13 erupted from his body like a dormant volcano. Boom! An invisible wave of air emanated from him, spreading outwards and stirring up fine dust from the ground. Those students who were nearby were overwhelmed by the spiritual pressure, their faces turned pale, and they involuntarily took a step back, feeling as if they could hardly breathe. The air seemed to freeze, becoming thick and heavy. The wooden sword in Yamada Kiyomitsu's hand seemed to emit a slight hum under the infusion of this immense spiritual pressure. He still held the knife in one hand, but the power contained in this strike would far exceed that of before. Ling stood opposite Yamada Kiyomitsu, feeling the terrifying spiritual pressure crashing down on him like a tsunami. His body's instincts screamed for danger. His vision was blurred by the impact and immense pressure, his ears were ringing, and he could barely hear anything around him. The immense difference in spiritual pressure created an intense sense of oppression on a mental level, causing his very soul to tremble. "Is it over? Am I going to collapse here?" A thought flashed through his mind. No. It can't end like this. He didn't come to the True Spiritual Arts Academy to admit defeat in the very first lesson. He carries the memories of a time traveler, the destiny of being the unborn older brother, and he also has things he must do and power he must acquire. 5 years of struggle in Rukanga, an extreme thirst for power, all these emotions, under the oppressive spiritual pressure as heavy as a mountain, seemed to find an outlet at this moment. Ling let out a roar that was almost like that of a wild beast, squeezing out every bit of potential from his body. Instead of backing down, he gripped the wooden sword tightly with both hands, dragging his wounded body like a moth drawn to a flame, and charged towards Yamada Kiyomitsu without hesitation. The moment he took that step, the instant all his will, resentment, anger, and desire converged into a single point. Buzz! A spiritual pressure far stronger than before, violent and full of primal wildness, erupted suddenly from Ling's seemingly frail body, like a volcano suppressed for millions of years. His short purple hair stood on end, the air around him distorted, and a visible pale purple aura of spiritual energy rose up like flames, enveloping his entire body. The intensity of this spiritual pressure instantly broke through the limits that a newborn should have, and even subtly shook Yamada Kiyomitsu's overwhelming spiritual pressure aura. What? That spiritual pressure? Are you kidding me? How can he have such spiritual pressure? The entire audience was shocked. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events, including Yamada Kiyomitsu, who was about to make his move. His sword swing paused slightly, his eyes filled with unprecedented shock and disbelief. Ling, this freshman from Rukanga, unexpectedly unleashed such astonishing power within him under dire circumstances. Chapter 4. Ling's roar, originating from the depths of his soul, seemed to ignite some forbidden fire hidden deep within his bloodline. The violent spiritual pressure was no longer a gentle stream, but transformed into a raging torrent, carrying a savage, violent aura that seemed to tear everything apart, before it erupted with a deafening roar. The purple spiritual light no longer merely lingered around him, but danced wildly around him as if it were alive, making him look like an azure returning from purgatory. The azure stone beneath his feet could not withstand the sudden, immense force. Spiderweb-like cracks spread wildly outwards from him, and the stone shattered. Yamada Kiyomitsu's originally stable spiritual pressure aura, like a mountain, began to ripple and twist violently under the impact of this wild and destructive purple spiritual pressure, just like the surface of a lake tossed with a boulder. The appreciative smile on his face froze instantly, replaced by unprecedented solemnity and shock. This spiritual pressure. Yamada Kiyomitsu was filled with shock and disbelief. He had experienced countless battles and witnessed spiritual pressure of all attributes, the overwhelming power of a captain-level spirit, the filth and evil of a hollow, the holy and fierce power of a Quincy, but he had never felt such a peculiar and violent spiritual pressure. It possesses both the pure energy of death and a chilling, manic frenzy that seems to devour everything. This is no ordinary Grim Reaper, nor can it be explained by ordinary mutations. If Ling were still able to spare a glance at the system at this moment, he would be horrified to discover that the spiritual pressure value displayed on the panel had skyrocketed to an unbelievable number, 67. His spiritual pressure was even higher than that of Yamada Kiyomitsu, which he had detected. But this force is filled with unstable tyranny, as if it could spiral out of control at any moment. Unbeknownst to Yamada Kiyomitsu, the root of this power lay deeply in Ryo's tragic origins. He was the son of Shiba Ishin, Kurosaki Ishin, and Kurosaki Masaki, who possessed hollow power within her, and had even died in the womb due to the uncontrolled hollow power corrupting him. The originally deadly hollow power did not completely disappear. Instead, it was buried in the soul society along with his soul fragments in an extremely subtle way, becoming his deepest hidden trump card and his greatest hidden danger. At this moment, under the immense pressure of life and death, this power originating from emptiness was instinctively unleashed for the first time. No time to think it through. Ling, unleashing terrifying power, had an unnatural crimson glint in his eyes. His reason seemed to have been overwhelmed by the violent force, leaving only the instinct to fight and destroy. He let out a low growl that sounded inhuman, and stomped his foot hard. Boom! Leaving a shallow crater in its wake, its figure transformed into a streak of purple lightning that tore through the air, charging fiercely towards Yamada Kiyomitsu at a speed far exceeding its previous speed. The ordinary wooden sword in his hand, now wreathed in boiling purple spiritual pressure, emitted a hum that seemed to groan under its strain, resembling a peerless weapon of destruction. Kiyomitsu Yamada's pupils suddenly contracted. Faced with this completely unexpected and dangerous attack, he could no longer maintain his previous composure. The wooden sword, which had been held in one hand, was instantly gripped with both hands. The spiritual pressure that had been suppressed was no longer held back and was unleashed at full power. The pure, condensed spiritual pressure belonging to the 13th Division commander of the Godi I-13 rose like white flames, rivaling Ling's purple spiritual pressure. Well done! Yamada Kiyomitsu shouted, advancing instead of retreating, charging forward to meet the purple lightning bolt. The next moment, two powerful forces and two resolute figures collided violently in the center of the training ground. Clang! No longer the dull thud of wooden swords clashing, but the piercing shriek of two peerless blades violently colliding. A terrifying shockwave, visible to the naked eye and mixed with purple and white spiritual pressure, spread wildly outwards in a ring shape. Rumble! The Qinggang stone ground was torn apart layer by layer, as fragile as tofu, and shattered. Smoke and dust mixed with violent spiritual particles instantly engulfed half of the training ground. The area where the trainees had been standing and watching was now the first to be affected. Not good. Retreat now. Ah! The gasps and screams were instantly drowned out by the deafening roar. The freshmen in Class 1 had never seen such a terrifying sight before. The sweeping spiritual pressure was like a tangible tsunami, carrying an aura of annihilation. They were like fallen leaves in a storm, unable to even stand firm before being swept away in an instant. Those with weaker cultivation levels felt a tightness in their chest and a sweet taste in their throat, almost fainting. The whole scene was in complete chaos, like the end of the world. At this critical moment, buzz, buzz, buzz. Several powerful spiritual pressure fluctuations instantly appeared around the training ground. The other teachers in the Shinigami Academy were all alarmed by this sudden and terrifying collision of spiritual pressure, which far exceeded the level of students, and rushed over as quickly as possible. A bespectacled, seemingly refined teacher was the first to act, and a huge, transparent wall of light instantly appeared in front of the students, attempting to block the shockwave. But in just a moment, the wall of light trembled violently under the impact of the violent spiritual pressure, and was covered with cracks. Not enough. Attack together, another burly teacher roared, 4 directions forbidden formation. The 4 or 5 teachers who arrived at the scene attacked simultaneously. Powerful spiritual pressure converged, and beams of spiritual particles shot out from their hands, intertwining in the air and quickly forming a huge, semi-transparent cubic barrier that enveloped the entire third training ground, including the 2 people colliding inside and the students on the outside. Boom! The shockwave slammed into the barrier set up by the Alliance, producing a deafening roar. The barrier shook violently, its light flickering, but it managed to hold on, isolating the destructive energy and preventing the students from being torn apart by the aftershocks of spiritual pressure. The teachers outside the barrier watched as sand and stones flew and spiritual pressure clashed violently inside, their faces turned pale and sweat beaded on their foreheads. What happened inside? Is that Mr. Yamada? And the person he's fighting is a student? Are you kidding me? What student has that kind of spiritual pressure? Their gazes were fixed on the chaotic energy center within the barrier. There, purple and white spiritual light flickered and intertwined wildly, accompanied by the dense, rain-like sound of wooden swords clashing. Clang! 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 Snap! Each collision caused the barrier to tremble violently. The more Yamada Kiyomitsu fought, the more alarmed he became. Ling's attacks were completely haphazard, consisting entirely of instinctive slashes, cuts, and sweeps, but his speed and power had reached terrifying levels. Even more frightening was his insane, all-consuming will to destroy everything, which completely suppressed even this veteran officer. He could only rely on his greater experience and exquisite swordsmanship to barely manage to parry and block. Finally, in yet another all-out, unpretentious battle. Snap! A clear, teeth-grinding cracking sound rang out. Yamada Kiyomitsu's pupils constricted sharply as he stared in disbelief at the wooden sword in his hand. A clear crack had spread from the point where it had collided with Ling's sword. This specially treated training wooden sword, capable of withstanding the spiritual pressure of a high-ranking official, was unable to withstand the opponent's power and was about to break. However, Ling's attack did not stop in the slightest. The moment the crack appeared, Ling seemed to sense an opportunity for victory, letting out an even more ferocious roar. His purple spiritual pressure surged wildly into the wooden sword like 100 rivers flowing into the sea. Boom! A burst of purple light erupted. Yamada Kiyomitsu felt an indescribable force surge through the cracked wooden sword. Smack! The wooden sword broke completely. Immediately afterwards, that destructive force struck Yamada Kiyomitsu's crossed arms in defense without reservation. Ugh! Yamada Kiyomitsu groaned, as if he had been hit by a giant beast at high speed. His feet left the ground, and he flew backward like a cannonball, slamming hard into the joint barrier wall behind him. Bang! The tremendous impact sent shockwaves through the minds of all the teachers maintaining the barrier. The sturdy barrier was actually dented into a human-shaped crater by Yamada Kiyomitsu's body, with spider-web-like cracks spreading around it, and it looked like it was about to shatter. Yamada! The teachers gasped in disbelief, almost unable to believe their eyes. Kiyomitsu Yamada, the captain of the 11th Division, was actually knocked away by a freshman in a direct confrontation. And they even managed to break through the barrier that they had set up together. Their gazes instantly turned to the center of the training field. As the smoke and dust slowly dissipated, Ling's figure was revealed. He remained in the stance of slashing with his sword, the purple spiritual pressure around him receding rapidly like a tide, and his crimson eyes returning to their original black, but filled with confusion and weakness from overexertion. Immediately afterwards, his body swayed, his eyes rolled back, and he fell straight backward, completely losing consciousness and collapsing to the ground. Almost at the same moment Ling collapsed, at the point where the barrier shattered. Yamada Kiyomitsu somewhat disheveledly stood up from a pile of rubble and spirit particle fragments. His Death Knight armor was slightly damaged, and a trickle of blood escaped from the corner of his mouth, clearly indicating that he had suffered some internal injuries from that earth-shattering attack. He raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth, looking at the unconscious Ling in the center of the room with a complex expression, his heart filled with indescribable shock. He did not use his full strength and underestimated his opponent, but the power Ling unleashed at the last moment was real and terrifying enough to threaten him. A teacher who was on good terms with him immediately rushed over, steadied him, and asked anxiously, "Yamada, what happened? Are you all right?" "That student." Kiyomitsu Yamada waved his hand, interrupting his friend's question, his gaze remaining fixed on Ling, and said in a deep voice, "I'm fine. It was just a friendly spar." "A sparring match?" The teacher glanced at the shattered barrier, then at the bloodstains at Yamada's mouth, and at the unconscious Ling in the arena. His expression was strange, and he couldn't help but chuckle in a low voice. "Your sparring match almost destroyed the training ground. And you lost to a freshman, Yamada. If word gets out, where will your 11th Division's reputation be?" Yamada Kiyomitsu blushed slightly, feeling somewhat embarrassed. He glared at his friend and retorted in a low voice, "Don't talk nonsense. I was just letting him win." Who knew this kid was so strange? But he knew in his heart that if Ling Li hadn't been exhausted and unconscious from that final blow, the consequences would have been unpredictable. He took a deep breath and changed the subject, saying, "All right, stop crowding around, it's all over, everyone can go home. Don't spread what happened today, to avoid causing unnecessary panic." Seeing this, the other teachers, though full of curiosity, knew the matter was serious, so they stopped asking questions, dispersed, and began to calm the frightened students. The barrier was also removed, leaving only a mess, like the third training ground after a hurricane. Kiyomitsu Yamada walked to the unconscious Ling's side, knelt down, and carefully examined his condition. His spiritual and physical strength were severely depleted, but his body was fine. However, that strange and violent spiritual pressure had disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. He hesitated for a moment, then bent down and carefully picked up Ling Hung. The boy's body wasn't heavy, but when Yamada Kiyomitsu held him, it felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. This weight came from his incomprehensible potential and the secrets that might be hidden behind it. Ignoring the complex gazes from the surrounding students, he carried the unconscious Ling and walked step by step away from the ruins of the training ground, heading towards the student dormitory area. The sunlight cast a long shadow of him, and the boy in his arms was as quiet as if he were asleep. Renjiro Ise watched Yamada-sensei's departing figure, then glanced at the chaotic scene. He took a deep breath, turned to the still shaken class, and called out loudly, "Assemble!" Clean up the area. Swordsmanship lesson, continue. However, it was clear that everyone's mind was no longer fully focused on the lessons to come. That purple-haired boy named Ling, and his earth-shattering outburst, are destined to become an indelible part of their memories. As for Kiyomitsu Yamada, carrying this enormous mystery, he disappeared at the end of the path, bathed in the afterglow of the setting sun. Chapter 5. Ling's consciousness slowly rose from a bottomless darkness and chaos, like a drowning person finally struggling to the surface. The first thing to recover was my senses. I felt the hard texture of the bed beneath me, and the air was filled with the unique smell of the True Spiritual Arts Academy dormitory, a mixture of wood, a faint scent of disinfectant, and spiritual dust. He struggled to open his heavy eyelids, his vision gradually clearing until he saw the familiar ceiling, his single room in the student dormitory. What's wrong with me? Ling propped herself up and rubbed her temples, which were still throbbing. Memories are like shattered pieces of glass, and I try my best to piece them back together. He only remembered being late for swordsmanship class in the afternoon, and then Mr. Yamada made that 3-move challenge. He remembered that he had fought with all his might to withstand 2 moves, and on the 3rd move, Mr. Yamada unleashed a terrifying spiritual pressure, and under that suffocating pressure, it felt as if something exploded inside him. After that, everything went blank, with only some blurry fragments filled with violent purple and intense shockwaves. I rushed in, and then... Ling frowned, trying to recall the events, but came up with nothing. His last memory was of himself roaring and charging towards Yamada Kiyomitsu. He had no idea what happened after that or how he got back to the dormitory. He subconsciously checked his body and found no obvious injuries other than some soreness in his muscles from overexertion and mental fatigue. It seems he's all right. Yamada-sensei must have gone easy on him. Ling could only speculate. He shook his head, temporarily suppressing those chaotic thoughts. Since I can't remember, I won't waste my energy on it. The most urgent task is to recover my condition in order to prepare for the upcoming studies and practice. He sat cross-legged and tried to enter into meditation, nurturing his somewhat depleted spiritual pressure. The next morning, as the rising sun, the sun of Soul Society, shone through the window and filled the room, Ling had already finished his morning meditation and was mostly recovered. He changed into a spotless white student uniform, casually combed his slightly messy purple short hair, then pushed open the door and headed towards the teaching building. The True Spiritual Arts Academy was bathed in a pale golden light in the early morning. Dewdrops clung to the leaves of the plants in the courtyard, and the air was fresh and invigorating. Some early risers either strolled in the courtyard or hurried to their classrooms. However, when Ling's figure appeared in the corridor leading to Class 1, a subtle change quietly occurred. The once noisy corridor fell silent as he approached. The students who passed by, whether from the same class or other classes, seemed to have their eyes fixed on him, with a complex mix of curiosity, awe, and even a hint of fear. The atmosphere reached its peak when Ling pushed open the door to Class 1. The classroom, which had been as noisy as a marketplace, suddenly fell silent the moment he stepped in, as if a mute button had been pressed. Almost all the students who were talking, laughing, or reviewing their lessons all looked up and focused their attention on the purple-haired boy. That look was no longer the indifference or disdain of the beginning of the school year, but rather as if looking at some incomprehensible, dangerous monster. Ling paused slightly, feeling somewhat uncomfortable at the sudden attention she was receiving. He could clearly feel the weight in those gazes, but he didn't understand why. Has word spread that I was punished by Mr. Yamada for being late yesterday? Or is it because of something else? His expression was calm, showing no sign of anything unusual. He simply walked straight to his window seat as usual. He had just sat down when a brown-haired boy, someone he rarely interacted with, hesitated for a moment before cautiously approaching him. Lowering his voice, he asked with barely suppressed curiosity, "Hey, Ling, how did you do that yesterday?" Ling turned her head to look at the classmate named Lian Cheng Zaihui, Her eyes filled with confusion. What did you do? Renjo Shuaki's eyes widened, as if he had heard something unbelievable. You don't remember? You were at the training ground yesterday, with Mr. Yamada. Ling shook her head and said frankly, I only remember rushing towards Mr. Yamada, and after that, I have no recollection. My god! You don't remember? Renjo Shuaki's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from the surrounding classmates. He quickly lowered his voice, his tone filled with excitement and disbelief. Yesterday you unleashed an incredibly terrifying spiritual pressure. Purple. And you broke Yamada-sensei's wooden sword. You even sent Yamada-sensei flying. You broke through the barrier that the teachers had set up together. My god, we all thought we were doomed. Ling's pupils contracted slightly, and a crack finally appeared on her calm face. Defeat Mr. Yamada? Break the wooden sword? Shoot it away? Breaking through the barrier? This series of messages struck his perception like a heavy hammer. He had personally experienced Yamada Kiyomitsu's spiritual pressure, which was a vast power far exceeding his own level at the time. How could I possibly? He subconsciously glanced around the classroom again, seeing the unmistakable shock, lingering fear, and even a hint of admiration in his classmates' eyes. He understood that what Lian Cheng Zhihuyi said was very likely not an exaggerated rumor, but the truth. I defeated Mr. Yamada. Ling repeated in a low voice, a huge wave of emotions surging within him. But the giant wave quickly subsided, replaced by a profound understanding. Yes, that out-of-control, violent power. Although the memory is hazy, the throbbing sensation that felt like it was tearing my soul apart and destroying everything still lingers. Combining the purple spiritual pressure described by Renjo Shuaki, an answer becomes clear. It was the power within him originating from hollows that was activated at that critical moment of life and death. I see. Ling murmured to himself. He didn't feel much joy, instead, a strong sense of vigilance arose within him. This force is uncontrollable and fraught with unknown dangers. Moreover, such a high-profile exposure is likely to attract unnecessary attention and trouble. But he quickly calmed down. He knew he was special. As the son of Kurosaki Ishin and Kurosaki Masaki, and as an anomaly who died due to the corruption of hollow power but survives in soul form, he is one of only two beings in this world who simultaneously possess the powers of a Shinigami, a Quincy, and a hollow. This special status is both a curse and his greatest asset. Thank you for letting me know. Ling nodded to Lian Chengxiu, her tone returning to calm, as if what she had just heard was just a trivial matter. He didn't offer any further explanation, nor did he show any smugness. He simply turned around, took out today's textbook, and began to preview it, ignoring the inquisitive gazes around him. Lian Chengxiu was taken aback for a moment. Looking at Ling's nonchalant expression, she opened her mouth, but ultimately swallowed back her questions and awkwardly returned to her seat. Ling's reaction, in the eyes of others, only added to his air of mystery. Time flows like water, passing by quietly. Life in Soul Society seems unchanging, but within the Shinigami Academy, change happens every single day. In the blink of an eye, a year has passed since the drill ground incident that shocked the entire institute. Throughout the year, Ling's life was as regular as a precision instrument. Classroom, training ground, library, dormitory, a simple routine. He almost completely abandoned all unnecessary social interactions and entertainment, devoting all his energy to the cultivation of slaying fist and walking ghost. His efforts have yielded astonishing results. His spiritual pressure is clearly displayed on the system panel as spiritual pressure, 36. This rate of improvement far surpasses that of his peers, and even makes some senior students feel ashamed. This is not only due to his daily, unwavering, intensive cultivation, but also seems to be related to his unique soul essence, with an astonishingly high efficiency in the assimilation of spiritual particles. In terms of cutting techniques, Ling displayed remarkable talent. He seemed born to wield a knife. He had honed his basic sword skills to perfection, each move was concise, sharp, and efficient, without any unnecessary frills. Within a year, in the internal sparring sessions, no one in the class could withstand more than 2 moves from him. Even when sparring with Kiyomitsu Yamada, who personally instructed him, Ling was no longer the novice who could only passively take hits. With his exquisite swordsmanship, quick reflexes, and already considerable spiritual pressure, he was able to exchange blows with Yamada Kiyomitsu for dozens of rounds without being at a disadvantage. As Yamada Kiyomitsu looked at this student who was making rapid progress, the surprise in his eyes had long since turned into a habitual seriousness, and even occasionally a hint of barely perceptible amazement would appear. He had to constantly increase the intensity of his sparring sessions in order to keep up with Ling's progress. Bai Dasheng and Ling were equally outstanding. The fighting instincts honed through 5 years of struggling to survive in Rukanga gave him a level of control over his body and a grasp of timing that far surpassed that of a flower raised in a greenhouse. His movements are swift as lightning, with tricky angles, often enabling him to launch attacks in seemingly impossible situations. During a public sparring session with a martial arts instructor specializing in hand-to-hand combat, Ling cleverly overcame the instructor's strength, seizing a tiny opening and delivering a clean and decisive joint lock, knocking the instructor to the ground and causing a stir among the audience. Although the teacher did not use his full strength, Ling's practical combat skills far exceeded the requirements of the teaching syllabus. In terms of shunpo, instant step, Ling's performance, while not as dazzling as his swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat, still firmly places him among the top in the class. His instant step is steady and swift, leaving clear and solid afterimages as he moves, especially in small-scale maneuvers, where it is extremely deceptive. He may not be as elusive and ghostly as some students who are naturally gifted in speed, but his solid foundation and efficient use of spiritual pressure make him a force to be reckoned with in actual combat. What's most astonishing is Ling's talent in the ghost path. Kido, as the most complex of Shinigami skills, requiring precise control of spiritual pressure and incantation, has always been a difficult skill for many students. However, for Ling, the way of the ghost seemed to have become instinct. His control over spiritual pressure reached an outrageous level. He handled both the gathering and release of spiritual power for Hado and the construction and maintenance of the form for Binding Path with ease. Having only been enrolled for a year, Ling is already able to perfectly chant and unleash all the ghost paths within the sequence number 30. Whether it's breaking through the Dao or not, he can chant at an extremely fast speed, with power far exceeding the standard, and with precise control. Perfectly unleashing Kido no 30. This achievement is something that even many ordinary members of the Godai 13 who have graduated from the Shinigami Academy years ago and joined the Godai 13 might not be able to do easily. And this is just the performance of a freshman who has only been enrolled for a year. The instructor in charge of the demonic arts course, watching Ling's effortless mastery of the arts, often couldn't help but shake his head and sigh, "A monster, truly a monster." A year has transformed Ling from a purple-haired boy who arrived with secrets and a sense of urgency into a dazzling, even blinding, rising star that cannot be ignored at the true Central Spiritual Arts Academy. He remained taciturn and solitary, but no one dared to look at him as a lowlife from Rukanga anymore. His very existence was like a silent mountain peak, standing before all the students in the class, reminding them of the gap between talent and hard work. As for Ling himself, he was moving forward steadfastly and silently toward his predetermined goal through this daily arduous training. He knew that the real challenges lay in the distant future. This year's growth was just the beginning. Chapter 6. Time at the Shinigami Academy slipped by quietly, like the ceaseless drifting clouds above Siritii, amidst day after day of training, learning, and meditation. Ling's rapid growth is evident to all. His reputation has long since transcended the first-year students, and he has even become a name frequently mentioned among older students and some teachers, evoking both amazement and a touch of apprehension. Spiritual pressure, 36. This number, like a clear boundary, completely distinguishes him from ordinary freshmen. However, this dazzling progress, in the eyes of others, did nothing to alleviate the growing anxiety in Ling's heart. The source of that anxiety always points to the same thing as azuchi, a type of asphyxiation. The prototype of those thousands of Zanpakuto, the true core and partner of the Shinigami's power. According to the Academy's ironclad rules, only upon completing 6 years of study, formally graduating, and joining the Godai 13 are students eligible to be awarded their own asachi, a type of Japanese scepter. 6 years. For Ling, this period of time felt like an eternity. The alarm bells of the future kept echoing in his mind: Aizen's conspiracy, the threat of the Aaron car, the shadow of the Wandenreich. These known calamities hung over his head like the sword of Damocles, making it impossible for him to proceed with his plans in a peaceful manner. He craved power, a power that belonged to him, a power that could sever his destiny, and that would be faster and more direct. His longing for asada, a type of hot pot, had become an obsession, gnawing at his reason day and night. He mustered his courage several times and applied to the teachers in charge of student affairs, and even to Yamada Kiyomitsu, who valued him highly, hoping to be granted an asabu ahead of schedule. The reasons are nothing more than the exceptional talent they have displayed, their urgent need for power, and so on. However, every application was met with an unequivocal rejection. Ling, your talent is undeniable, a senior teacher once explained earnestly, his eyes filled with admiration yet also with an unwavering principle. But the rules of the true Central Spiritual Arts Academy are the culmination of the wisdom of generations of sages, designed to ensure students build a solid foundation and avoid being misled or even harmed by premature exposure to superficial techniques. No swordsmanship before graduation. This is an ironclad rule, and no one can break it. Yamada Kiyomitsu's response was even more direct, his sharp gaze seemingly piercing through Ling's inner anxiety. Young man, impatience is a cardinal sin in warfare. The asada is not a toy, it is a mirror reflecting your inner self, a partner for life and death. Holding on to it until you are truly ready to shoulder that weight will only harm you. Patiently hone your skills, when the time comes, it will naturally be yours. Ironclad rules, the time is not yet ripe. These words, like cold rain, extinguished his hopes that had been rekindled time and time again, but also made the flame of longing burn even more secretly and intensely in his heart. During his free time, Ling often went alone to a secluded grove of trees behind the true Central Spiritual Arts Academy. Here, ancient trees reach for the sky, their dense foliage blocking most of the light, creating a secluded and tranquil atmosphere. He habitually leaped onto the tallest of the spirit oak trees, sat on its thick branches, leaned against the cool, rough bark, and gazed at the blurry outline of Siritii in the distance and the boundless sky beyond. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the fresh scent of grass and trees. But this tranquility could not quell the turmoil within him. His thoughts once again sank into the excavation of his past life memories, trying to find a possible gap in those vague settings and data. Nime Yaritsu. 0 Division. Sword God. He murmured these keywords. The asachi he forged is the source of all Zanpakuto and Soul Society. It seems the setting mentions that the essence of the asachi is a prototype of sword spirit infused with the souls of many Shinigami. This idea struck him like a bolt of lightning, piercing through the fog of his thoughts. The souls of numerous Shinigami. If the birth of an asachi is closely related to the power of souls, then does it mean that the soul itself is the key material for forging a Zanpakuto? Since Utsunemeya could collect and fuse the souls of others to create standardized asachi, then, what about myself? A crazy, audacious, even blasphemous idea burst forth uncontrollably from the depths of his heart. Could I forge a shikata that is uniquely mine, with my own soul? The moment this thought crossed Ling's mind, even she felt a pang of fear. The soul is the most fundamental core of existence, the cornerstone that sustains everything. Touching the soul, tearing the soul apart, the risks involved are so great that even the phrase utter destruction seems inadequate. This is by no means the orthodox path of death, it may even lead one astray. However, once this thought took root, it became like the most tenacious vine, frantically binding his mind. An extreme thirst for power, a resentment towards a predetermined fate, and a latent madness deep within, born of the emptiness and unafraid of destruction, all fueled this dangerous idea. Perhaps, this is my only shortcut. Ling's eyes gradually hardened, even carrying a gambler's resolve. For the next month, Ling seemed to transform into a scholar with an insatiable thirst for knowledge, except that he only had one research topic: asahi, a type of asparagus. He took every opportunity to consult with teachers of different subjects about shallow tapping. I inquired about cases of combining asahi and kendo from the teacher of kendo, explored the history and legends of famous swords from the teacher of Zanpakuto, and even subtly inquired about scattered records of the origin of Zanpakuto from the administrative instructor in charge of the history of Soul Society. His talent and diligence won the favor of most teachers, who were also generous in offering their guidance when he asked questions. However, after a month, Ling was disappointed to find that even these official Shinigami mostly understood asahi as a tool, a partner, and something that requires communication and practice. Its most fundamental origins and forging principles are almost unknown to anyone, or rather, they belong to forbidden knowledge strictly sealed by higher authorities. All they could offer were conventional tips on how to use the techniques and how to employ gentle, gradual tactics, which were of no help to Ling's insane plan. It seems that conventional methods will not yield an answer. A month later, in her single room, Ling gazed at the bright moon outside the window, and the last trace of hesitation in her heart was extinguished. I can only try it myself. He knew it was incredibly dangerous, but he couldn't bear the long wait any longer. He decided to embark on an unprecedented adventure, following the dangerous path he had deduced. In the dead of night, all was quiet. The trainees were already fast asleep, with only the occasional soft footsteps of the patrol breaking the silence. Ling quietly got up, changed into dark clothes, and like a ghost, evaded the patrols, leaving the dormitory area and returning to the familiar, dark depths of the woods behind the mountain. It was even quieter here than during the day. The moonlight was fragmented by the dense canopy of trees, casting dappled and eerie spots of light on the ground. The occasional hooting of an owl added to the eerie atmosphere. Ling chose a clearing in the woods, where the terrain was relatively flat and surrounded by huge rocks, which could block out the view and sound to some extent. His first attempt was to connect with the empty power within his body that had erupted during a critical moment. He sat cross-legged, trying to calm his mind and explore his inner self, attempting to touch and guide that violent and unfamiliar energy hidden deep within his soul. He recalled how he felt at the time: the anger fueled by immense pressure, the resentment, the urge to destroy everything. However, no matter how hard he tried or how he tried to evoke his emotions, that power was like a rock sinking into the deep sea, unresponsive. It seems to only manifest itself in life or death situations, or when he completely loses his mind. Otherwise, it is perfectly hidden and cannot be found. As expected, it didn't work. Ling opened her eyes helplessly, a hint of disappointment flashing in them. If one could guide the power of the void, perhaps it could be used as fuel or hammer to forge the soul, but this path is clearly not feasible. So, only one method remains, which is also the most direct and the most dangerous: to simulate the forging process of Nimeyaritsu according to the vague settings of his previous life, but using his own soul as the material. The core step is tearing your soul apart. Soul, torn apart. Ling Shen took a deep breath of the cold night air, his eyes becoming resolute and crazed. Without further hesitation, he closed his eyes again, focusing all his attention on the core area of his body that represented his very existence. In his conscious perception, his soul is not a tangible object, but a warm, bright, constantly flowing and shimmering ocean of light. This light is composed of countless spiritual particles marked with his imprint, representing his consciousness, memories, emotions, and the entire source of his power: spiritual pressure. This sea of light is proof of his existence. What he was about to do was something that went against all of life's instincts. He was going to personally tear this whole sea of light apart into another part. He mobilized all his spiritual pressure, those 36 points of pure power refined through countless trials. Under his will, spiritual pressure no longer flowed gently, but was forcibly compressed and condensed, transforming into an invisible blade of will that was sharper and more dangerous than any physical blade. This sword hangs above the sea of light within his own soul. Ling's forehead instantly broke out in a fine layer of cold sweat, and her body began to tremble slightly uncontrollably. The mere thought of tearing oneself apart and the power to carry it out already brings immense mental burden and fear stemming from the life instinct. I must do it. He gritted his teeth, roaring inwardly, giving himself no room for regret. The next moment, the incredibly cruel blade of will formed from his own spiritual pressure slashed fiercely down towards the warm and complete sea of soul light that represented his own existence. The excruciating pain, beyond words, felt like a million red-hot steel needles piercing every corner of his consciousness the instant the blade touched the sea of light in his soul. That wasn't physical pain. Physical pain has its limits and can become numb. But this kind of pain directly affects existence itself, the very core of the concept of I. It's the collapse of cognition, the disintegration of existence. He felt his world shattering, like a mirror being struck by a heavy hammer, with countless cracks spreading outwards. The warm sea of light was forcibly torn open, and the light flickered violently, as if emitting a silent wail. An indescribable sense of loss and detachment overwhelmed him instantly, like a cold tide. Ling's body convulsed violently, and she curled up on the ground, her fingernails digging deeply into the soil and grass roots beneath her. He opened his mouth, but couldn't make any decent sound, only a hoarse, gurgling sound, like a broken bellows, came from his throat. His eyes were wide open, but his pupils were unfocused. What he saw before him was not the real forest, but countless distorted, broken lights and shadows and incomprehensible vortexes of color. It was a perceptual confusion caused directly by the damage to his soul. Cold sweat instantly soaked through his dark clothes, and his face turned as pale as a corpse. This pain far surpassed any physical injury he had ever experienced, and even far exceeded the vague feeling of death in his memory. This is a direct attack on existence itself, a mad step toward self-destruction. The blade of will had only pierced through slightly, the tearing process had only just begun, yet the indescribable pain had almost completely destroyed his sanity. He felt as if his consciousness was being torn to pieces by this pain, plunging into boundless darkness. No. I can't, stop. The remaining will flickered stubbornly like a faint candle flame amidst the storm of pain. He knew that if he gave up now, not only would all his previous efforts be in vain, but the wounds that had begun to tear at his soul could lead to unpredictable and terrible consequences, possibly even causing his soul to collapse and vanish completely. He must continue. This self-inflicted torture must be carried through to the end, until a part of the soul is successfully and completely torn off. Ling curled up on the cold ground, her body convulsing from extreme pain, her consciousness teetering on the brink of collapse. That cruel blade of will, which he himself had forged, still lingered at the initial rift in his soul. A deeper, more complete tearing was yet to begin. This self-destructive forging has only just begun the curtain on hell. Chapter 7. The indescribable pain was like a million red-hot files, repeatedly scraping and tearing at the deepest part of Ling's soul. It is not pain acting on the nerve endings of the body, but rather the collapse and disintegration of existence itself. His consciousness swayed violently in this storm of pain that exceeded his limits, like a small boat in a raging storm, on the verge of being torn apart and annihilated into the invisible darkness. My senses were completely confused, the sights of the real world, the cold earth, the dappled moonlight, the swaying shadows of trees had long since vanished. Instead, there were countless distorted and broken bands of light, sharp and piercing noises, perhaps just the lamentations of souls, and an endless sense of peeling and fragmentation, like waves crashing one after another. Ling's curled-up body convulsed unconsciously, his fingernails digging deep into the ground and turning upwards, bleeding, but he was completely unaware of it. All senses, all thoughts, were filled with and destroyed by the excruciating pain of the soul being forcibly torn apart. Just as his consciousness was about to be completely consumed by this boundless pain, and he was about to fall into eternal silence. Suddenly, everything came to an abrupt end. Like a high-speed train suddenly coming to a stop, like a deafening thunderclap abruptly disappearing. The excruciating pain, which felt like it was crushing the soul, vanished abruptly and completely in a single moment. It's not a reduction, not numbness, it's a complete disappearance. It was as if the hellish torment I had just experienced was merely a nightmare that was far too realistic. Ling's consciousness was abruptly thrown out of the extreme pain, plunging her into a strange state of weightlessness and blankness. He opened his eyes somewhat blankly, if consciousness had eyes. What came into view was no longer the dense forest in the dead of night, but an extremely desolate and lifeless scene. He was atop a solitary peak. The mountain peaks are steep and rugged, with bizarre rocks jutting out. The ground is lifeless grey-black rock, cracked with countless bottomless fissures. A huge moon hung in the sky, emitting a pale white light, but the moonlight was icy cold and devoid of warmth, casting an eerie white glow over the entire mountaintop. There was no wind, no sound, the air was stagnant, as if solid, filled with an age-old despair and emptiness. What is most shocking is that the huge mountaintop is densely covered with countless knives. These swords come in various shapes and sizes, some are standard samurai swords, some are broken blades, some are twisted and oddly shaped weapons, and some are just blurry shadows of sword outlines. They stand silently among the rocks, like an endless forest of knife-shaped tombstones. Each knife exudes a faint yet distinct aura, whether cold, violent, sorrowful, or deathly silent, which together create the suffocating atmosphere of this space. Where is this? Ling's consciousness, which he seemed to be in at the moment, stood atop this mountain of knives, warily surveying his surroundings. Everything was so unfamiliar, yet it also subtly conveyed a sense of familiarity. It was as if every stone and every knife here had some deep connection with him. Oh! A relaxed, even somewhat mocking voice suddenly rang out behind Ling, shattering the absolute silence of this world of death. He turned around abruptly. Less than 10 steps behind him, a figure appeared out of nowhere. When Ling saw the person's appearance clearly, even in his conscious state, he felt a strong shock and disorientation. That person looks exactly like him. The same height, the same build, the same slightly slender yet powerful physique, even their facial contours and features are exactly the same. The only difference is in the color. Ling's own image carries a normal sense of color. The he in front of us was completely pure white from head to toe. Her hair was pure white, without any blemish, her skin was a cold, pale white, and she wore a simple, equally pure white sleeveless robe. He stood there, as if carved from the purest white jade, strangely blending into this grey, black, and pale world, yet exuding an incongruous, vibrant, and dangerous aura. What was most striking were his eyes. Those were golden vertical pupils like those of a wild beast, and at this moment they were looking Ling up and down with a gaze that mixed curiosity, amusement, and undisguised madness. To actually want to tear your own soul apart to create Asada. The White Ling spoke, the voice exactly like Ling's, but the tone was full of frivolity and mockery. Is it wishful thinking, or pure madness? Even I find you somewhat interesting, original form. Ling understood instantly. The white version of himself before him was the manifestation of the latent illusion power within him. It is a collection of his dark side, destructive desires, primal instincts, everything he has tried to suppress or has not yet come to know. Wu Bai. Ling subconsciously murmured a name, as if the name was meant for the other person. You did give me a nice name. The White Ling, Wu Bai, tilted his head, revealing an exaggerated and twisted smile that showed his gleaming white teeth. Simple, straightforward, I like it. So, what brings you to this boring place, master? You're not in unbearable pain and want me to help you end that stupid self-harm, are you? Ling Ning stared at Wu Bai, countless thoughts flashing through her mind in an instant. He had initially failed in his attempt to communicate with the power of the void, but amidst the extreme pain of his soul being torn apart, he unexpectedly entered this place that resembled an inner world and encountered Wu Bai. This is a crisis, but also an opportunity. He suppressed the turmoil within him and cut to the chase, his tone grave and resolute. Wu Bai, I need power. I need to forge my own Asuna, and I can't wait 6 years. You are a part of my power, lend me a hand. Give you a hand. Wu Bai seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world, letting out a maniacal laugh that echoed jarringly in the deathly silence of the mountain of knives. Ha ha ha. Interesting. Absolutely hilarious. Who do you think I am? Your dog? Summoned and dismissed at will? Help you? On what grounds? He stopped laughing, his golden vertical pupils fixed intently on Ling, filled with aggression. Want my power? Fine. Then show me what you've got. Let me see if you, this so-called original body who spends all day thinking about rules, plans, and suppressing yourself, are truly qualified to wield my power to destroy everything. Before he finished speaking, Wu Bai casually reached out and easily pulled a grotesque, serrated white longsword from the rock beside him. The blade exuded a strong, malevolent aura, as if it craved blood and destruction. Ling understood. Words are meaningless here. In this virtual world, power reigns supreme, and conquest is the only language. Wu Bai will not easily give in, he needs a battle on the level of souls to determine who will prevail. As you wish. Ling's eyes sharpened, showing no sign of backing down. He also reached out and pulled a seemingly ordinary, yet imbued with a calm and collected aura, black long sword from the ground beside him. As soon as he held the knife, a feeling of blood connection arose spontaneously, as if the knife itself was an extension of his consciousness. That's right. Let's fight. Let me have some fun. Wu Bai roared excitedly, his entire body instantly enveloped in a frenzied white spiritual pressure. Without another word, his figure transformed into a white lightning bolt, charging forward at a speed far beyond Ling's imagination. His movements were full of wild, violent aesthetics, without any rules, only the most direct and deadly attacks. Ling dared not be negligent. He let out a low shout, and a solid spiritual pressure rose around him as he wielded his black long sword and charged forward. Clang! The twin blades clashed for the first time, producing a piercing screech and sparks flying everywhere. An immense force surged through him, causing Ling's arm to go numb and his consciousness to tremble. The power of Wu Bai is violent and pure, filled with destructive intent. Too slow. Too soft. Is that all you've got? Wu Bai roared in a seductive and mocking tone as he frantically swung his sword, the white blade flashing like a storm, attacking Ling's vitals from all sorts of tricky angles. Look at you. Suppressing yourself, following those bullshit rules. You clearly crave power, yet you dare not face your inner desires. You and I are one, admit it. Destruction is the eternal reality. Order is nothing but a fragile illusion. Ling gritted his teeth and pushed his basic swordsmanship to its limits, parrying, dodging, and counter-attacking. His swordsmanship was rigorous and precise, as solid as a rock, struggling to withstand Wu Bai's fierce attacks. Every clash of swords is not only a contest of strength, but also a battle of wills. Wu Bai's words, like venomous snakes, kept burrowing into his mind, trying to shake his beliefs. Why resist me? Embrace this power. We can destroy all obstacles. Let the whole world tremble under our power. That is true freedom. Wu Bai's attacks became increasingly fierce, each strike more ruthless than the last, forcing Ling to retreat repeatedly. Shut up! Ling roared, seizing an opening, his black long sword shot out like a venomous dragon, aiming straight for Wu Bai's chest. However, Wu Bai easily dodged with an almost contorted movement, and slashed at Ling's neck with his backhand. See? You're angry too. You have murderous intent too. Why pretend? Wu Bai grinned maliciously. Admit your true nature. If we join forces, there's nothing we can't do. Why go through the trouble of tearing your own soul apart over a mere skirmish? Just go and steal. Steal whichever one you like. That's the fastest way. That's not my way. Ling Ji retorted, panting as he unleashed his attack. Wu Bai's words were full of temptation, but his unwavering rationality told him that it was a one-way road to utter madness. The Dao? Ha ha ha. Wu Bai laughed wildly, his attack suddenly changing again. It was no longer a pure assault, his swordsmanship now carried a hint of unpredictability and cunning, as if he could predict Ling's movements. Is your Dao just suppression and forbearance? Hiding under the rules like a mouse? How laughable! Look at this world! Wu Bai suddenly slashed away Ling's black longsword, took a step back, and spread his arms wide, facing the desolate mountain of blades and the pale sky. This deathly silence! This emptiness! This is the true state of your heart. You yearn for change, yet you fear it. You are the greatest contradiction. Let me liberate you. Let me break this tedious cage. Before he finished speaking, Wu Bai roared and charged forward again. This time, a chilling white light gathered on his blade, clearly indicating that he was about to launch an even stronger attack. Ling gripped the long black sword tightly, his eyes extremely serious. He knew that this battle was not only about conquering strength, but also about upholding one's beliefs. He must overcome Wu Bai, not only this force, but also the possibility of his own heart being tempted into depravity. The two figures clashed violently once more, swords flashing and blades clashing, on the summit of this desolate place symbolizing Ling's inner world, a life-or-death struggle unfolding that would determine their future paths. The white frenzy and the black steadfastness clashed fiercely, and for a time it was difficult to determine which was superior. Chapter 8. On the desolate and lifeless summit of the Mountain of Knives, the figures in pure white and pitch black were like two intertwined bolts of lightning, constantly colliding, separating, and then crashing together again with even greater ferocity. The jarring clang of metal against metal was the only melody in this silent world, accompanied by Wu Bai's seductive and manic laughter and Ling's increasingly heavy breathing. What's wrong? Is that all you can do? Where's your resolve? Is this all the desire you have to break the rules? Wu Bai laughed wildly, his white serrated long sword drawing a strange arc, bypassing Ling's block and aiming straight for his ribs. His attacks were not only ferocious, but also carried a ruthless insight into people's hearts, always targeting the weak points in Ling's defense or will. Ling gritted his teeth, his wrist twisting rapidly, and the black long sword narrowly blocked the insidious attack. However, the immense force still made his arm go numb and he staggered backward, leaving deep scratches on the grey-black rock. His swordsmanship remained meticulous, but his once rock-solid stance had begun to show subtle cracks. Wu Bai's words, like maggots clinging to his bones, kept burrowing into his mind, stirring up the deepest contradictions within him. Look at you. You possess a power that even you fear, yet you insist on shackled yourself. Wu Bai pressed his advantage relentlessly, his attacks like a tidal wave, one after another. White blades wove a net of death, firmly enveloping Ling. Rules? Those are tools the weak use to bind the strong. The Central Spiritual Arts Academy? The Godai 13? They're just bigger cages. You crave Asuna precisely because you want the power to break all of this, so why follow their pointless rules? I crave power, not for destruction. Linga unleashed a slash, then countered with a sharp black blade of light, which Wu Bai easily dodged. It's for protection. It's for taking control of my own destiny. Protect? Ridiculous. Wu Bai dodged the blade's edge, his twisted smile widening. Protect what? Those classmates who see you as a monster? Those teachers who cling to outdated rules? Or that future whose very existence is uncertain? You yourself are walking on thin ice. What do you have to protect? Only absolute power, the power to destroy all obstacles, is the only truth. Admit it, deep down, you, like me, revel in the thrill of this slaughter. You crave a cathartic destruction. No. It's not like that. Ling roared, but a trace of hesitation in his heart was like a stone thrown into a still lake, creating ripples. Wu Bai's words are not entirely without reason. His dissatisfaction with the status quo and his thirst for power indeed contained an impulse to break the rules. That moment of hesitation was a fatal flaw in a battle of their caliber. In the blink of an eye, as Ling Xin's mind was slightly distracted, the golden vertical pupil in Wu Bai's eyes flashed with a fierce light. Full of flaws. The white serrated long sword suddenly slashed upwards at an incredible angle, striking the hilt of the black long sword with perfect precision. Clang! A sudden, sharp force struck Ling, causing him excruciating pain in his hand. He could no longer hold on, and the black long sword flew out of his grasp, spinning in the air before embedding itself far away in the rocks. Immediately afterward, Wu Bai didn't hesitate, delivering a swift side kick that slammed into Ling's chest. Pfft! Ling's consciousness was as if it had been hit by a high-speed train. He was sent flying backward and crashed heavily onto the hard rock ground more than 10 meters away. He rolled several times before barely coming to a stop. A violent tremor came, and although it was not a physical injury, the weakness and pain of a damaged consciousness were just as real. Cough cough. Ling struggled to get up, but felt her body was incredibly heavy, and her consciousness became blurred. Wu Bai didn't pursue, but leisurely strolled over, stood before Ling, looking down at him with a mocking and cruel smile. See? Hesitation leads to defeat. What are you hesitating about? Are you hesitating whether to kill me? Or are you hesitating whether to completely accept me? He bent down, bringing the face exactly like Ling's but filled with a sinister aura closer to it. His golden pupils were fixed on Ling's eyes. Come on, pick up your knife. Right here, now, with the resolve to kill me, strike with all your might. Unleash your true self. As he spoke, Wu Bai even exaggeratedly opened his arms, completely exposing his defenseless chest to Ling, a posture full of provocation and temptation. Panting heavily, Ling looked at Wu Bai, who was so close at hand, and then at the black long sword stuck in the ground in the distance. A violent impulse was indeed surging within him to pick up the knife, to strike recklessly, to end this torment, and to completely possess this power. The thought was incredibly tempting. But he bit his tongue hard, forcibly suppressing the impulse. He struggled to his feet, swaying as he stood. Instead of picking up the knife that had been knocked away, he staggered to the side and pulled a new knife from the rocks. This knife has an antique style, and its blade has a dark grey color, as if it bears endless years and weight. Wu Bai, Ling's voice was somewhat hoarse, yet carried a quality that had hardened with experience. Your power is formidable, and alluring. But he raised his eyes, his gaze sharp and resolute, like steel tempered in fire. No matter what you say, no matter how much darkness and contradiction reside within me, I will not betray my conscience. Power is a tool, how I use it depends on my will. I will not be devoured by you, nor will I become a puppet of destruction. He gripped the ancient grey sword tightly with both hands, its tip pointing directly at Wu Bai. I will defeat you. Not destroy you, but make you submit. I will make this power of yours work for me, and lead you down the path I have chosen. Wu Bai looked at the unwavering determination in Ling's eyes, and the playful smile on his face slowly faded, replaced by a strange expression that mixed surprise, amusement, and even a hint of admiration. Submit? Ha ha ha. He laughed again, but this time, his laughter carried less madness and more of an indescribable meaning. Interesting. Very interesting. Do you want to become a king? Ling. Do you want to become the king who tames this ferocious beast? Not the king, Ling slowly assumed an attacking stance, a solidified spiritual pressure emanating from his grey blade. It is me. The complete me. Then let's try it. Let me see how long your true heart can hold out. Wu Bai roared, his pale spiritual pressure soaring into the sky like flames, transforming once again into white lightning and rushing towards Ling. The battles that followed were even more brutal. Ling was knocked down time and time again. His knife was repeatedly knocked away and broken. Wu Bai's strength, speed, and fighting instincts far surpassed his own, and his seductive and destructive words were all-pervasive, constantly assaulting his psychological defenses. With each fall, his consciousness seemed to fade away, and endless exhaustion and pain threatened to overwhelm him like a tidal wave. Give up. Following your instincts is the only way to find liberation. Your insistence is pointless. Look, you've fallen again. That's reality. But each time, on the verge of succumbing to despair, an even more resilient force surges forth from the depths of the soul. He recalled his initial reason for coming to Soul Society, his worries about the future, and his belief that he must not stop here. He remembered Yamada Kiyomitsu's warning and his determination to choose this perilous path. I can't lose. My path is my own to decide. Power must be under my control. He stood up again and again, dragging his increasingly heavy body, picking up any knife he could grasp, and charging towards Wu Bai once more. His eyes, far from dimming with each failure and rise, grew ever brighter, like refined steel repeatedly forged in a raging fire, its impurities removed, leaving only the purest tenacity and will. He stopped listening to Wu Bai's seductive words and instead focused all his attention on the battle itself, feeling the flow of power in each exchange, searching for the patterns in Wu Bai's attacks, and the unshakable core within his own heart. I wonder how many times I failed, dozens of times? Hundreds of times? In this imagined world devoid of time, only battle remains an eternal theme. Finally, after being knocked down and getting back up countless times, in a seemingly identical exchange, when Wu Bai once again slashed at him from his usual unpredictable angle, Ling's eyes suddenly flashed with an all-knowing light. He neither parried nor dodged, but instead, in a near-suicidal stance, poured all his strength and will into the blade in his hand, ignoring the white blade light slashing towards him, and thrust it straight at Wu Bai's laughing face. This strike transcended technique and speed, it was the culmination of all his unwillingness, all his perseverance, and all his will. Wu Bai's maniacal laughter froze instantly. He seemed not to have expected Ling to resort to such a completely defensive approach. He wanted to change his tactics, but it was too late. Pfft! A soft sound, like tearing silk, rang out. Ling's blade pierced Wu Bai's left chest with pinpoint accuracy, leaving a shallow but clearly visible gash. Blood slowly seeped from the wound. Almost simultaneously, Wu Bai's white serrated long sword stopped in front of Ling's neck, the cold blade pressed against his skin, but did not advance an inch further. Time seemed to stand still at this moment. Wu Bai looked down at the knife wound on his chest, then looked up at Ling, who was panting heavily, pale-faced but with burning eyes. The crazed and distorted expression on his face gradually subsided, finally turning into a calm, even approving smile. Hat! Wu Bai chuckled softly, releasing the knife from his hand. The white, serrated long sword vanished in specks of light. Not bad at all. Finally, it's starting to look decent. Ling also released his grip on the knife, which fell to the ground. He was almost completely exhausted, but he still managed to stand, staring intently at Wu Bai, and asked the same question he had asked earlier, but his tone was completely different now. Wu Bai, can you lend me a hand now? Wu Bai looked at Ling, his golden vertical pupils gleaming. He reached out and touched the knife wound on his chest, and the wound began to slowly heal. He tilted his head, revealing an expression completely different from before, one that carried a hint of complexity and anticipation. Humph! Although you're infuriatingly stubborn, and far from earning my true approval, but," he paused, his tone becoming somewhat casual yet earnest, "considering how hard you've worked, and that this pain is rather interesting, helping you this time isn't out of the question." He turned to Ling, revealing a smile that could be described as friendly yet still tinged with malice. "After all, if you just finish like this, I'll get really bored. So, I'll reluctantly take on the mess outside." Wu Bai said something else, but Ling's consciousness began to blur, and the desolate scene of the knife mountain around her began to distort and dissipate like a faded oil painting. The force that had drawn his consciousness into this place was fading, and he was about to return to reality. In the instant before his consciousness completely faded, Ling only saw Wu Bai standing there, facing the direction he had left, a cryptic smile playing on his lips. The world of mental images returned to silence, leaving only Wu Bai alone. He gazed at the spot where Ling's consciousness had vanished, his smile fading. He murmured to himself, his voice echoing softly in the desolate landscape, "Then let me see just how far you can go on this thorny path you chose yourself." Main body. After saying that, he turned around and looked at the center of the mountain of knives. There, seemingly out of nowhere, floated a ball of light about the size of a fist, emitting a soft and pure pale white glow. The sphere of light slowly rotated, with countless tiny points of light seemingly flowing inside, emanating a warm yet slightly tearing and painful aura that seemed out of place in this desolate world. This is the fragment of soul that Ling forcibly tore off from his own soul at the cost of immense pain. Wu Bai walked up to the ball of light, extended his pure white finger, and gently touched the surface of the ball. The sphere of light trembled slightly, as if in response to his touch. Forging a shallow sword with the soul, a mad idea. Wu Bai murmured, a strange light flashing in his golden vertical pupils. "However, since it's your choice, let's forge a sword that truly belongs to us." As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful, pale white spiritual pressure filled with void energy suddenly erupted from Wu Bai's body. The spiritual pressure was no longer frenzied and violent, but rather carried a sense of focus and a kind of craftsman-like precision. A pale white spiritual pressure, like flames, slowly enveloped the pale white sphere of soul light. Immediately afterwards, Wu Bai made a fist with both hands, as if he were holding an invisible iron hammer. Using his own power of emptiness as a hammer and Ling's soul fragments as an embryo, he began an unprecedented forging at the pinnacle of this world of mental images. Buzz! An invisible hammer fell, causing the sphere of soul light to tremble violently and emit a deep hum. Each hammer strike seemed to strike the very essence of the soul, forcibly fusing, forging, and shaping the characteristics of the power of the void with Ling's soul fragments. The pale and white light intertwined, swirling and gradually coalescing into a long, blurry outline. Outside, in the dense forest of the real world, Ling's body remained curled up on the ground, unconscious. However, the chaotic aura around him began to gradually calm down in a slow and steady rhythm. A faint yet entirely new fluctuation, mixed with his own spiritual pressure and a trace of strange void power, began to quietly develop within his body. Ling's unique Asahida style is undergoing its final formation in the purgatory of his heart. Chapter 9. Darkness, a long and silent darkness. Ling's consciousness seemed to have been floating in an endless sea of nothingness for billions of years. There was no light, no sound, no concept of time, only a profound weariness originating from existence itself and a strange sense of wholeness, which replaced the extreme pain that had almost torn her soul to pieces. I don't know how much time passed, perhaps a moment, perhaps eternity, but a faint glimmer of light, like the first rays of dawn piercing through thick clouds, laboriously seeped into the chaos of consciousness. Next comes touch. Beneath me was a hard, cold object, damp with soil and rough, sharp stones. The cool, fresh morning air brushed against my face, carrying the unique fragrance of dew, grass, and earth. His hearing gradually returned. In the distance, the faint yet clear chirping of birds broke the silence of the night, one call after another. Closer still, the soft rustling of the wind through the leaves is like a gentle whisper. Ling's eyelashes trembled slightly, like a butterfly struggling to break free of its cocoon, and finally, with great difficulty, she opened a crack in her eyelashes. The blurry light and shadow gradually focused.